Comic-Con at Home attendees, and thanks for watching Orbit's New Voices in Science Fiction and Fantasy panel. I'm going to be joined today by several extraordinarily talented authors whose debut novels have been, or will be, published by Orbit in 2020. You can learn more about their books at the URL on your screen. While we're sorry not to be seeing all of you in person in San Diego this year, it's really exciting to be able to get authors together from across the globe for a panel. K.S. Villoso, author of The Wolf of Orinero, is calling in from Canada. Luke Arnold, author of The Last Mile in Sunder City, and Devin Madson, author of We Ride the Storm, are joining us from Australia. We have M.A. Carrick, author of The Mask of Mirrors, Andrea Stewart, author of The Bone Shard Daughter, and Essa Hansen, author of No Fet Gloss, in California. And Constance Sayers, author of A Witch in Time, is making her appearance from Washington, D.C. Each of the New Voices authors will get to ask the other 6 a question. In between, a few other authors will tell you about their books coming out later this year. And there will be a few short breaks where you'll hear from other Orbit authors you know and love. I hope you enjoy the panel and the rest of Comic-Con at Home.
I'm Andrea Stewart, and my book is The Bone Shard Daughter. And my question for everyone is, if you had to choose a food to compare your book to, what would it be and why?
Okay, for me, more of a beverage than a food, but it would be like end of the day, black American diner coffee. Not much nutritional value, but a bit burnt and a bit dirty, but when it's what you want, it's the only thing you need.
I think for me, it would be the best food for A Witch in Time would be something that is layered and complex, because the book has multiple timelines that are very layered and very complex. And so something like a tiramisu or a lasagna that has multiple layers of bechamel sauce and cheese, and so something like that would be very complex and calorie laden.
We also, I think, would need to go with a beverage, hot chocolate, specifically spiced hot chocolate. Our main character adores it. We actually feed it to her during the book. But we're not talking Swiss Miss here. The kind of hot chocolate we're thinking of is dark and rich and decadent, and spices give it that little hint of danger.
I think my book would be one of those really fancily decorated cupcakes that looks all really pretty with like the gold leaf decorations and stuff on it. But it's got to be served with like 10 shots of moonshine, because it looks all really pretty on top, but you really need the booze to get through it.
So for the space food in my novel, I took inspiration from molecular gastronomy, which reinterprets familiar flavors in unexpected shapes and textures. So I think my book might be something straightforward like a chocolate cake, but it would look like a glistening orb topped with effervescent foam and curls of smoke, or something else outlandish. Rich and cozy while at the same time defying expectations.
So this food comes from my ethnic background, and it's called gulay na lada. It's a stew of coconut milk, shrimp paste, and green chili pepper. And I think that the title character of The Wolf of Orinero, Queen Talion, is as fiery as my heritage demands her to be.
My name is Essa Hansen, and my novel No Fet Gloss comes out this November. My question is, what real-life experience or hobby of yours ended up in your book?
I grew up in the slums, and I ended up taking a lot of those streets for inspiration for one of the districts that is featured predominantly in my book. I also enjoy experimenting with food, so some of the food featured in The Wolf of Orinero is something I might probably whip up in my kitchen out of laziness and call Asian fusion.
The one hobby that I think made it through in The Witch in Time is that all of my characters play the piano, and it's something that I really love, and I had to play the piano for 14 years, forced by my parents, and I was terrible at it, and I'm still terrible at it, and I gave my character the ability to be kind of a savant, which is something I think I kind of wanted to do and I didn't do, so definitely it was the piano.
For me, it's actually very similar to what Kay said. It's definitely my love of food and cooking that made its way into my book. One of the things I really like about going to other countries is going to the grocery stores and their markets and eating food off the street or at hole-in-the-wall places. So I just really love that whole experience of preparing food and how that can bring people together. And that's in my book quite a bit.
For me, there was a card game that my brother and my cousins played that then really got adapted when I was doing traveling and he was doing traveling as kind of a version of 4-card golf that we ended up naming F the Legend, which in the second book I've adapted it to a gnomish game that will translate to Strike the Hero. I needed, my character goes into a casino and I kind of wanted to give him a card game to play. So I thought I'd take this game that we played in a lot of hostels and pubs around the world and threw it into the second book.
Mine is nowhere near as kind of cheery as that. So the experience of mine that has made it not so much into this book, but definitely later books in this series is my experience of panic attacks. I tend to get them for social interactions and also whenever I think I've been bitten by a poisonous snake, even when I haven't. This happens a lot in Australia, you would be surprised. So I actually was able to kind of bleed that onto the page and describe very accurately my experience of having panic attacks to the point where when I actually wrote these things and read them back, it was almost a bit triggering. So that was a really strange experience, but I'm glad I was able to put it in as accurately as I did.
So I actually have a bit of a background. I've done a fair bit of costuming for theater and historical recreation. And our main character is a con artist. And one of the tools she uses to sell the con is cutting edge fashion on a shoestring budget, which she manages with the help of her sister and partner in crime, who is a much better seamstress and designer than I am. But that meant I got to kind of indulge in my fabric addiction and, use some of my construction know-how in it. And I actually have, one of the things I want to do is make a lot of the costumes and a lot of the clothing that we have in the book. And I have the fabric, just need the time.
The world of the 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow, because that world is full of numerous doors into other worlds, which would mean I could have endless adventures.
I guess I'd like to live in Ian Banks's culture, a far future utopia where everyone can be and do exactly what they like. But if I'm honest, I'd like to live there as one of his sentient spaceships, his super intelligent AIs, because they're easily the most interesting characters in those books.
Most science fiction and fantasy worlds are even worse than our own, but I would like to live in the world of my novel Man-Made Boy, which is basically our world, but with monsters, and some of them are quite nice.
The problem is it doesn't tell you if you're going to be the protagonist or not, so I feel like I'd have to pick one that's sort of utopian for ordinary people, like Ian Banks's Culture or Peter Hamilton's Commonwealth series.
I'm actually working on that right now for Orbit because so many sci-fi worlds are like full of terrible problems and you wouldn't want to live there. So I've decided to have a world you actually would want to live in.
I have been reading Seven Devils by Elizabeth May and Laura Lamb, which comes out August of this year. The book starts with one of the main characters cutting off someone's finger. For those of you who know me, you know why I immediately fell in love with this book.
If I could hang out in any science fiction universe, I would probably choose Becky Chambers because it looks like it'd be a fun place to explore and I have less chance of dying horribly than some other universes I could name.
A fantasy world I would want to live in. This is a hard one, but I'm going to have to go with Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I would go and live in Howl's Moving Castle right now, immediately, the second. And Howl is perfectly welcome to join me if he likes.
So I actually wouldn't mind living in our world, just not our city, because I invented the magic system, so I'm fine.
I figure none of them, unless you can promise me that I will have money and access to magic and won't have to go anywhere near the plot.
Plot bad.
Sometimes logic and l'appel du vide, the death urge, are in malicious agreement. August Kitco leans over the stone railing and gauges the distance to the jutting pediment of the cliff face below. He'll have to get a running start if he wants to have a chance of hitting the water. A couple of sharp rocks poke up from beneath the waves to say hi.
I got a story to tell you. I've been meaning to make a start for a long while now, and this is me doing it. But I'm warning you, it might be a bumpy road.
In the court of the Imperial Mahal, the pyre was being built.
All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu wrote this millennia before I learned to read, long before my father pressed a book into my 7-year-old hands in a desperate attempt to stop me from picking on my sister.
In 30 years, Dr. Naomi Lovelace has never given an interview. Whenever I asked her to tell me what happened up there, Naomi would say no one who has been to space could ever describe it to someone who hasn't.
It was madness to rob the grave of a green bone. Only someone with little regard for his own life would consider it. But if one was that sort of person, then tonight was the moment of opportunity.
Istoki was not the smallest, poorest, or most remote village in Ismaros, but it was close.
The lodging house had many kinds of quiet. There was the quiet of sleep, children packed shoulder to shoulder on the threadbare carpets of the various rooms, with only an occasional snore or rustle to break the silence.
They came the summer she was 6.
This is the opening for my forthcoming novel set in the Night Angel universe. But this is only about the 7th draft, so I do expect it to change. He's young and probably innocent, and it doesn't matter. In the next 3 minutes, the kid has to die.
I'm Constance Sayers. I'm the author of A Witch in Time. And my question is, what drew you to writing science fiction and fantasy?
I've always been a fantasy reader and always wanted to be an author, but somewhere when I was about 16, these two things kind of collided, and I realized that I wanted to be a fantasy author, mostly because I liked the humongously broad experience that it allows you to play with in terms of characters and settings and plots. There really is no limit but the imagination, and I loved that about it.
We both have a background in folklore, anthropology, and archaeology. In fact, we met on an archaeological dig in Wales when we were both undergrads. And I think for both of us, it kind of comes out of that same root that we love fantasy because we love mythology and magic and exploring different time periods, different ways of life that aren't modern day America.
So science fiction and fantasy books feel like portals into other worlds. And as a writer, I get to exercise a very overactive imagination. And kind of like Devin said, there's so much potential, unlimited ways to interpret or implement the same idea. And as such, it's a sandbox for idea, whether that's scientific or magical, psychological or sociological. I get to create a world and watch the things I put in at work, sometimes in ways that surprise me.
So for me, it was definitely mostly because I was reading science fiction and fantasy. I grew up in a very, very nerdy household, so there was a lot of Star Trek there. And I ended up finding my dad's old copy of I, Robot in the basement, and it was pretty much all over from there. I do think for fantasy especially, there's a lovely sense of escapism and wonder that you get to play with that you don't get to in any other kind of fiction genre.
I like being able to bend reality for thematic resolutions. There are more tools for storytelling in science fiction and fantasy I've found where you're not limited by reality. And as someone who likes using books to explore pre-colonial identity or post-colonial and imperialism struggles, there are many reasons I don't want to be limited by reality.
Yeah, for me, I think the real world terrifies me a little bit, especially having to put like concrete words onto something that always seems in flux. Like most times when I write a tweet, I have to go have a lie down afterwards. The panic of like trying to something up that's real. So the beauty of sci-fi and fantasy, you can kind of explore big themes and ideas and characters without being tethered to this terrifying real world.
Hello, I'm Devin Madson. My book is We Ride the Storm, which is out in June. My question for everybody is, what would be your war cry and what animal would you ride into battle?
So I would probably be clinging to the back of a fox dragon, screaming "Tea!" because I have a close personal connection to Uncle Iroh.
Me, giant black jaguar. But for a battle cry, I've been practicing karate for a long time, so honestly, it would probably just be like a wordless ki. I'm not going to deafen you.
I seem to have developed a habit of when things are really good or just enjoying the moment of just sitting back and saying good times. like to myself or to whoever's in the room. So I think good times would have to be my war cry. And I'd probably ride a wombat, considering with the amount of square droppings that are around the farm I'm on at the moment. I think I'd be able to wrangle one pretty quickly.
I will be very, very honest. I would never ride into battle. My chance of death by arrow is extremely high. One time there were kids playing with a frisbee from across the field, and for some reason it found my head. So you will find me in the war room, and the animal of choice that I'm riding is a chair. And I'll be pretending to look useful. My war cry will probably be, is it lunchtime yet?
I can't say my war cry because it would be like I'd be swearing, so that would be it. And I have to say that I would want to ride into battle the bravest little creature that I know, and right now that is my 16-pound puppy, who I have seen fall on her head and get back up. And I'm serious; she's the bravest thing I've ever seen, and so that's what I'm riding into battle.
For me, my war cry honestly would probably be something like, "Here goes, I guess," just because I'm not a very aggressive person to begin with. And what I would ride into battle would probably be a giant snow leopard, so I could at least look cool as long if I don't sound cool.
I am very quiet, so I don't know if I'm capable of a war cry. As for an animal, in my novel, there are alien creatures called Nofek. The adults are 5 to 6 feet tall, with a muscular build, fur and scaly skin, claws and teeth, sort of half feline, half canine, and a bit of behemoth from Final Fantasy. Cuddly if tamed, more than big enough to ride, and vicious in battle.
Hi Comic-Con at Home attendees. My name is Andrea Stewart and I'm the author of The Bone Shard Daughter, which is the first in the Drowning Empire trilogy. It's an epic fantasy in an Asian-inspired setting that follows several characters: a daughter trying to reclaim her rightful place as heir, a smuggler who professes not to care but can't seem to stop doing good things, 2 women in an established relationship struggling with the class differences between them, and a stranger on a remote island trying to unravel the mystery of why she's there. So this is, if you like, a failing empire on the brink of revolution, migratory islands, monstrous constructs powered by bone shard magic, a magic system inspired by computer programming, and magical animal companions. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the book.
Hello Comic-Con. I'm fantasy author Joe Abercrombie, sometimes known as Lord Grimdark, even though, in actual fact, I'm not a real lord. In September, my new book, A Trouble with Peace, is coming out. It's the second installment in my Age of Madness trilogy, which brings the fantasy world of the First Law roaring into the Industrial Age. It features vivid characters doing exciting things, with lashings of visceral action, heartwarming romance, a rich vein of dark humour, plenty of exploding machinery, and even at times, a little bit of magic. I feel sure you're going to love it.
Hello, Comic-Con at Home people. I am Kim Stanley Robinson, and I am the author of a science fiction novel called The Ministry for the Future from Orbit Books, to come out this October. It's a book set in the very near future in which a group of people assigned by the Paris Agreement to represent and defend the interests of the generations to come try to figure out what that means and how radical they can get and what they can do, and then they see what happens. So given all of the events of this summer, I think this is going to be a strange and interesting reading experience that I hope will stimulate some ideas, and I also hope will be an entertaining novel. So I have really enjoyed being at Comic-Con, and I look forward to joining it again in some future time when we can celebrate our togetherness. And in the meantime, thanks to everyone.
Hey Comic-Con, I'm Alex E. Harrow, the author of The Once and Future Witches, which is like an alternate version of the American women's suffrage movement, except get this, they're witches. It's about history and sisterhood and different kinds of womanhood, and 3 particular women who have had enough. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy Comic-Con.
Hello to all the at-home attendees of this year's San Diego Comic-Con. I hope you're having a great time at the event so far. My name's Evan Winter, and I'm the author of The Rage of Dragons and the upcoming sequel, The Fires of Vengeance. And I'm here also to try and tell you a little bit about the books in the hopes that you might give them a shot and enjoy them. So here we go. The series is called The Burning, and both books basically are Gladiator meets John Wick in secondary world version of Bronze Age Africa. It's about cycles of violence, it's sword and sorcery style epic fantasy, and it also has dragons. So I hope you'll give it a try. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Comic-Con, and I hope that one day I get to meet quite a few of you in person. Enjoy the rest of the event, and thank you very much for watching.
Hi Comic-Con at home crowd. My name's Essa Hansen. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author and a sound designer in the same genres. I've worked on Marvel films such as Doctor Strange, Thor Ragnarok, and Avengers Endgame. My debut space opera, No Fet Gloss, is set in a vast bubble multiverse where a young man survives the slaughter of his whole planet. Fixated on revenge against the slavers responsible, he seizes a starship with a soul of its own and the technology to literally create worlds. With a found family of alien misfits, he'll discover that the multiverse is much bigger, more advanced, mysterious, and dangerous than he ever imagined. If you're looking for a Star Wars type fix, or want something dark, weird, and cinematic, check out No Fet Gloss this November. Thanks for watching.
Hey Comic-Con at Home fans, my name is Craig DeLuey. Thanks for the chance to say hello and introduce you to my new horror novel coming out from Hachette Red Hook in November 2020, The Children of Red Peak. In this book, 4 survivors of a cult's horrific end reunite years later to confront their traumatic past and the entity that appeared on the final night. I've always been fascinated by cults, and I thought they'd make a perfect match for a novel dealing with supernatural and psychological horror. Thematically, the book takes a deep dive into some pretty big ideas related to memory, trauma, belief, and belonging. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the read.
Hey San Diego Comic-Con at home attendees, Case and Calendar here, author of Queen of the Conquered and the upcoming King of the Rising. Queen of the Conquered asks a question through Sigourney Rose. How do you find freedom for yourself and for others when you're an oppressed person with privilege? Its sequel, King of the Rising, asks a question through Lauren Yannick. On the quest for freedom, do you show mercy to the people who stand in your way, or do you burn everything to the ground? Thanks for watching.
I'm K.S. Villoso. I am the author of The Wolf of Oreñaro and the upcoming The Ikisar Falcon. My question is, which of your characters do you identify with the most and why?
I definitely think that the character that I identify with the most in my book is probably Helen. She works in Washington. She had my job, and I probably drew the most from her. And I think that was probably the easiest thing for me to write. Where I kind of stepped away and had characters that were the very different from me, I think were some of the best characters that I wrote in the book. So, but I would definitely say that Helen, I mean, certainly she was modern day and has my job. So certainly that.
For me, it's Fetch Phillips, my protagonist, which isn't always a nice thing. I think I put a lot of my worst attributes into him. Hopefully I try and do things that maybe I've grown out of, but I do think we are growing up together and we'll continue to grow together as this series goes on.
This is kind of a funny one because the Rook and Rose trilogy is actually based on a tabletop role-playing game that Alyssa's running, which means that, yes, our protagonist, Ren, is my PC. So I identify with her because I've been her in a way that's kind of more true for a game than I think it usually is for a novel. I'd like to think I'm not too much actually like her because she's a con artist with a lifetime subscription to trust issues. But on the other hand, she does acquire names like they're going out of style, and I've got my legal name, and then Marie Brennan is a pen name, and now M.A. Carrick, and I swear I didn't mean to method act my way through this.
This was a really tough one for me. I think there are elements of me in each of the main characters, but I think a younger me would have definitely identified most with Lynn. She's always striving against expectations she feels she can't meet. And while she's accomplished in some ways, she's still desperately lonely and more isolated than she'd like to be. I think like for her, she thinks what she wants is to be better, but what she really wants is to connect with someone. So I had a very nerdy childhood. That's kind of how I felt.
For me, probably my protagonist, Caden. In many ways, we're really different, but mainly because he gets to externalize feelings that I internalize. So we're both smart, sensitive, and self-sacrificing, but he has a bad temper and gets to act out his intense anger at injustice, broken systems, and normalized exploitation. We're both protector types, but he channels that physically, whereas I turn mentally to solutions. So I got to put a lot of myself in him in ways that don't directly mirror the way I process things.
I think, as with Andrea's, I put quite a bit of me into all of my main characters. There is a lot of my kind of snarky, sarcastic inner monologue in Cassandra, which I love writing because I just get to dial everything up to 11 and have fun with it. But for my kind of inner personal self, I feel there's an awful lot more in Miko, because she's trying to balance so many facets of herself. The idea that she wants to always do the right thing versus, her personal drive and ambition and all of everybody's ideas of her with her idea of herself. And that is something that I identify with really strongly.
We are jointly M.A. Carrick, Marie Brennan, and Alyssa Helms, and we are the authors of The Mask of Mirrors. Our question for you is, what's your favorite part of your setting?
Favorite aspect of the setting is the multiverse itself. It's made up of spherical universes of various size, stuck together in a vast foam, unique physics in each, but all on the same timeline. And you can traverse from one to another through membrane-like skins. And it was really fun to play with transformations of technology and biology between universes. Plus, I love the idea of diversity being a social norm in a world with so much divergence.
For me, I think it is the history of my world because I write everything in the same world, and so I'm constantly building on this sense of history and the fact that small decisions and moments can create big ripple effects. I really love playing with that. So continuously building with the idea of history and how it is kind of portrayed and told by the people in the story, because what's written in the history books isn't always what's true.
A Witch in Time takes place in Belle Epoque, France in 1895 and 1896, Hollywood in 1934, and Los Angeles and Taos in 1970, and then Washington, D.C. in modern day. And so the settings were very, very unique to each of the time periods. All of them I was drawn to in some way. I would say of all of them, the one that I think stands out the most for me is Hollywood in the 1930s. It was just a magical time at the beginning of really the creation of all of the movie industry. And there was just so much intrigue and mystery and a lot of people that had mysterious deaths. And it was just a really fascinating, great time period to research. And so for me, I think that holds a real special place in the entire book in terms of setting.
The heavy Asian influence in the setting in my books lets me indulge in childhood memories. I like lifting actual scenes from my childhood and then adding a fantasy twist to them. So for example, it used to take about 12 hours by bus to travel to my home province in Bicol. And the road would just take me past these gorgeous rice fields, low-lying hills, and beaches. So when I write, I just take some of these memories and transplant them straight onto the page so I can just swim in the images until I'm home again.
I have a lot of fun writing about Sunder City, but I think the most interesting part for me is that when we start the story, it's only a few years after all the magic died and disappeared from the world. And so every single character in Sunder City and the world as a whole has kind of is dealing with that fact. So their future has disappeared, their connection to their past has changed, and their whole sense of self is really being reevaluated. So it's really fun. I think that's often where most of us have the most interesting times in our lives and go through the biggest changes, when we have to reassess everything. And so that's really fun writing, seeing how different characters react to this huge shift.
I think one of the favorite parts of my setting for my book was the magic system. So the magic system that I have in there is inspired a bit by computer programming. So the Emperor collects these shards that power these constructs, but he also writes commands onto each shard. And these commands interact with one another and form these sort of logic puzzles. And I really love like logic puzzles. So that was a really fun thing to play with for me, especially when people are trying to break those commands. It's basically like putting a bug in the system.
I am Luke Arnold, author of The Last Smile in Sunder City and the upcoming sequel, Dead Man in a Ditch. And my question to you is, if you could cast any character you've written with any actor, alive or dead, who would it be?
So I actually had to do some searching around for this because I hadn't ever considered this. But I was thinking for Jovis, who is the smuggler in my book, I was thinking maybe like a younger Daniel Henney, which is impossible, but you did say anybody. So
I think, like Andrea, I actually have never really thought about this. I'm one of those people who can never remember movies and actors and things. I'm terrible with faces and names. But I was thinking about this, and one of the movies I really loved watching when I was younger was The Mummy, and I realized that Oded Fair would be the most amazing Ra. He is my super honorable exiled warrior, and it would just be perfect, I think.
I hadn't thought of this either. But I would love to cast Cate Blanchett as someone. I think she would be perfect as the antagonist in my first book, a woman who's lived ages and played the long game for profit, manipulating economy and ecology. She's cold and calculating with an air of affected drama, and Cate is fantastic at conveying both grace and intense gravity.
This one, actually, a reader gave me this, and it's a great idea. It's the Filipino actor Eddie Garcia, who passed away last year, and he would be a perfect warlord Yeshin. He could have delivered the lines with the viciousness and spite warlord Yeshin is known for, and fittingly, he also comes from my province of Bicol, where the cultural identity of being brave and daring inspired the Oreñaro.
So we actually do some pretty extensive casting for the game, but it changed for the book. And so we have portraits, reference portraits pulled for a lot of the characters, but we're not really set on any particular casting. But what we do have is a very ethnically diverse setting and a diverse cast. And so actually the main character herself is mixed race. And so if we were ever to have a casting, we would want that to be reflected in the casting. And we also have a fairly important trans character, and so we would want a trans actor to play that character if that were to ever happen.
I actually think about this all the time. I when I write, I have an actor in mind usually. And so for Luke Varner, I have always thought that actor Callum Keith Rennie, who was Leoben Kanoy in Battlestar Galactica, would be the best Luke Varner. I've always, even as I wrote every scene, I always kind of thought he would be the great casting for Luke Varner. I will say that, I also kind of opened up to other possibilities. And so also for Luke Varner, I think that the actor who plays Doc Holliday in Winona Earp would be a really good Luke Varner. I think he might have to shave his beard, but I think that would a mustache, but that would really work.
While I was researching random shit flying through the air, I looked into the Cascadia Fault, which is a fault line that runs down from Vancouver, Canada to the top of California just off the coast. And I found out three things. One, we cannot predict when it will go. Two, when it does go, it will kill hundreds of thousands of people through tsunamis and a massive earthquake. And three, there is nothing we can do to stop it. Have a nice day.
I learned a lot of interesting things for Goldilocks, but one of my favorite factoids was that our best chance of getting close to the speed of light is giant gold laser kites in space. But I didn't use those. I decided to use the Alcubierre drive instead, which technically doesn't break the laws of physics if we can figure out how to harness negative energy.
During the Reign of Terror in France, it was fashionable to wear these absolutely gorgeous little earrings that were shaped like little guillotines.
I learned that there is, to this day, a holiday in Poland where they celebrate the drowning of Marzana, the goddess of winter, where they create an effigy of Marzana and they drown it in the river. to celebrate the end of winter and the beginning of spring?
Well, I've been studying music theory, actually, because I'm trying to get a better handle on modal jazz for my forthcoming sci-fi trilogy from Orbit. It's about a bunch of giant robots that are piloted by musicians, and I have a lot of different musical styles to learn about, so I've really been enjoying that.
Right now I'm working on Jade Legacy, the third book in the Greenbone saga, and a really cool bit of research that I learned about while I was writing is that gemstones can be mined from the bottom of the ocean. And what this has to do with magical jade, you'll just have to wait and find out.
Hey, so the coolest thing I've had to research in preparing for my latest book is how to run for mayor of New York City.
So our setting actually has 3 integrated magic systems, and one of them, Numenatria, is based on sacred geometry. So I actually spent a lot of time learning how to make geometric figures from scratch using only a compass, an edge, and a pencil.
I learned how to con people. Yours is more useful.
I learned that polar bears have perfect heat insulation. So if you were trying to track a polar bear using thermal imaging glasses, it would be invisible to you because it would be exactly the same temperature as the surrounding landscape. I think that's amazing.
I just finished reading the nonfiction book After Geoengineering by Holly Jean Beck, which looks at ways to tackle climate change. Important. And then I'm currently reading Imago, which is the 3rd book in the Lilith's Brood series.
So, like a large corner of fandom, I've actually fallen hard into this Chinese drama called The Untamed, which is based on a novel by Mo Xiang Tongshu. And so I've been reading fan translations of all of her books, and they're really good. And Heaven Official's Blessing is my favorite.
I just finished David Mogo God Hunter by Suyi Davies Okungbowa, which is a post-apocalyptic Nigerian urban fantasy.
I'm currently reading Range of Ghosts by Elizabeth Bear.
Beneath the Rising by Premi Mohammed is an epic tale of cosmic horror, eldritch gods, the excruciating pain of betrayal, and friendships that cost far more than you can imagine.
I've just finished Alex Harrow's The Once and Future Witches, which is just gorgeous and powerful and angry and magic. Anthony Horowitz's Nightshade, because my teen self would never forgive me not immediately reading the latest Alex Rider, and my teen self is right. And I'm just starting and loving The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart.
A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. So if you haven't checked that book out, definitely go and do that.
Right now I'm reading the last book in the Devabad trilogy by S.A. Chakrabarti, The Empire of Gold. And much like the rest of the series, it's absolutely wonderful.
The last thing I read that really blew me away was Frances Harding's latest novel, Deep Light, a fantasy adventure set in a very vividly realised ocean world of gods and monsters. There are some wonderful reveals, really vivid characters, and beautiful writing.
I really enjoyed Micaiah Johnson's The Space Between Worlds. It's a total punk anthem. I love it.